hosted by Johnny Carson. The inauguration with ABC News.
Skin with moisture. First super clean, then super moisturize, then super skin.
Are you spending too much on detergent? You can get clean clothes and save money every time you wash with ABC. Prove to yourself ABC with improved whitening cleans and whitens as well as a higher price detergent. Look, one pile washed in a higher price detergent, one in ABC.
Whites look the same.
I can't see any difference.
The difference you can see is the amount you save by using ABC regularly. So why pay more? Buy ABC.
You must have known I was frying up some maple leaf bacon.
Sure smells good.
Wait till you taste it. Can't beat that maple leaf flavor.
How come, Ben?
See the balance between the fat and lean? Nobody pays more attention to it than maple leaf. In fact, only about 2/3 of the bacon they slice is good enough to be called maple leaf.
Delicious.
For a good reason. Maple leaf. It's our best. Make it yours.
Webster is next on BCTV.
Good morning. Half the world is waiting to heave a vast sigh of relief when the American hostages finally get on that plane out of Iran. First it was the billions, then it was the trivial details, and now it's a delay because of the medical examination of the hostages, as you see from ABC right now.
The pictures, which had been videotaped apparently earlier this morning, showed a number of the hostages undergoing physical examinations, including electrocardiogram testing by an Algerian medical team. First pictures took American observers by surprise, but it wasn't too long before the process was geared up to identify those being shown on the pictures. The physical exam was given apparently before the hostages were taken to Tehran Airport, where planes are standing by to transport them out of Iran. The pictures may also have provided some clue as to why there's been a longer than expected delay in the release of the prisoners, which had been anticipated by this time. The wife of one of the hostages, Louisa Kennedy, who has been in close touch with the State Department in Washington for the past several days, told ABC News that medical examination by the Algerian team had been scheduled to take place yesterday. It was her belief that the delay in the physical testing indicated some problem in organization by the Iranians. She said, in fact, that this may have been typical of the way the Iranians have operated. The prisoner being seen now, Stephen William Kirtley, a Marine corporal who was stationed as an embassy guard in Iran since 1979. He's 21 years old, single, has 7 brothers and sisters. His father's a disabled veteran, and he's doing a 3-year hitch.
We'll bring you bulletins as they occur this morning. I only had my tongue partly in my cheek yesterday when I interviewed Tom Kent, an ex-newspaper man who's now chairman of the Royal Commission on Newspapers, for whatever it is worth. So I put this slightly snide question to the ex-civil servant, ex-deputy minister, etc., last night. Is it worth the while? You had my snide remark at the beginning, locking the stable door after. You cannot turn back the clock or turn back the page of yesterday's newspaper, now wrapped in fish and chips.
That's right, and that is absolutely true. And I must say, when I was first asked to get involved in this, which was just the day after those sad events you were talking about, my first reaction was, how can it be worth doing? But when I came to think about it for 24 hours or so, it seemed to me that, in fact, it is essential that we find a way, not to turn back the clock, you can't do that, but to find a way, to make what was good in the old clock work in a new clock.
You'll see Tom Kent later. Peter Desbarats, author, television commentator, astute observer on national affairs, is here this morning too. I think his book's got the wrong title. It's Canada Lost, Canada Found. It should be Canada Found, Canada Lost. You'll meet Peter later too. But to start the program this morning, we have a political hopeful, a man called Blaikie. You've never heard of him before. He's from somewhere in the East. And he wants, if you can believe it, to be president of the National Tory Association. We'll find out which candidate, if any, he backs, or if they're going to dump Joe for sure at the end of February, after the break. One cannot knock people who aspire to public office or high position in political parties. God knows we need some changes. But a man must be a glutton for punishment if he wants to become national president of the Conservative Party at this time. Such a man as Peter Blaikie, an unsuccessful Tory candidate in Quebec, fluently bilingual, of course, which is almost a must nowadays. And Mr. Blaikie, which candidate do you back for leadership of the party when the vote comes on February the 27th? Joe Clark, Joe Crosby, Brian Mulroney, Uncle Tom Cobley, or whom?
Jack, you know I'm not going to answer that question, and in any event I can't answer it because there's only one issue on the ballot, and that is, should the party have a leadership convention? There are no other candidates on February 27th.
Should the party have a leadership convention?
The delegates are going to answer that, and as far as I'm concerned, I'm a candidate for the presidency. I support the leader of the party. If the delegates decide that there will be a convention and I'm president, I'll support the new leader of the party. But as far as I'm concerned, the president supports the leader, so do candidates for the presidency.
Is it not a fact, however, that you may be highly disaffected by the lackluster support of Joe Clark given by the present president, Coates, Bob Coates?
He obviously has a different perception of the presidency than I do. I don't think the president of a party should be publicly disagreeing with the leader. Privately, you may have to do it often, and I might find myself in that position privately, not publicly.
But you think the president of the Conservative Party, the man who wields considerable power and influence, especially if it comes to office, must be a blindly devoted public follower of the party leader?
Not blindly devoted. I think he must be a rational public supporter of the leader of the party.
Why would a man who has been twice defeated in Quebec running for the Conservatives, right? Why would you go for the national presidency? I mean, well, I don't want to knock you on the subject, but I want to get some of your motives. You're a successful lawyer.
Correct.
Well enough off to be financially independent.
No, that's not true, but I'm a successful lawyer.
But having failed as a candidate, you now want to become the president.
Well, first of all, I don't accept your concept that I failed as a candidate. I didn't win the elections. I got over 30% of the vote, which in Quebec I regard as a triumph under the circumstances. I got more of the vote in 1980 than I did in 79, running against the national trend. I'm not prepared to accept that that's a failure. I'd just like to put one question, though, Jack. You started this segment by saying that we shouldn't knock political hopefuls. I wonder why it is that once they get to public office, everybody feels they can knock them all the time.
Oh, well, now we don't knock Trudeau as hard as we knocked Joe Clark. Did you notice what Mr. Trudeau said in Mexico City after his highly successful tour of the North-South nations?
I gather he said, I don't give a damn, and I guess my reaction to that is that Rhett Butler said it with a lot more style and Gone with the Wind.
Well, now, you may not be saying anything about Conservatives to me, but you'll certainly give me your opinion of Trudeau.
I think that's pretty clear.
Well, give me it.
My opinion of Trudeau,
Yeah.
I think he's been a disaster for this country. I became a Conservative in 1968 precisely because I was convinced that Pierre Trudeau would cause incredible damage to Canada, and I think that's what's happened.
Now, line out for me the potential candidates for the leadership. We can't just let you sit there and stonewall. I mean, there are a number of candidates, right? The tum-tum is that the disaffected vote, if it goes above 20%, will force Joe Clark to resign for leadership review. Do you subscribe to that 20% figure?
I don't subscribe to any particular figure. No, I'm not going to get involved in that kind of a discussion, obviously.
Well, how are we going to whip up interest in your candidacy or the Tory party leadership if people like yourself won't give some leadership on the subject?
Well, I've made it perfectly clear that I'm going to vote personally against review. But beyond that, as far as Mr. Clark's campaign is concerned, that's his campaign. And interestingly enough...
Oh, you're a Clark man.
No, I'm not prepared to say that. I support the leader of the party, but I just want to make this point. The delegates are quite prepared to make a distinction between the leadership issue and the presidency. The delegates are going to vote on the leadership review issue. They will then choose a president. It's only the honorable ladies and gentlemen of the media who insist on trying to peg the presidential candidates to one or other present leader or future
One has only
leader.
got to look at the action of past party officials like Dalton Camp to realize how political the job becomes.
But maybe it's time that changed. Maybe that's why, in fact, the Tory party hasn't been particularly successful. I'd like to see that change.
The fact remains, however, that Joe Clark won and lost in a very short order. Did he not? The government. The
Well,
reins
that's
of
a
power.
fact. That's a fact.
And that many Tories do want to change him.
There are certainly some who do.
Give me
I'm not going to accept many. There's certainly some.
Is it not, Joe deserves congratulations too for becoming almost, I believe, I'm not an expert on it, you are, totally bilingual.
I think he deserves a lot of credit for that. And in fact, strangely enough, even though it hasn't translated into votes in Quebec yet, he gets a lot of credit for that in Quebec.
Well, a man like Crosby, who is basically unilingual, would be a total disaster in Quebec, would he not?
Not necessarily. Like you, he understands showbiz, and he might be very successful in Quebec.
A man like Mulroney, on the other hand, handsome, suave, Turner style, but brighter, fluently bilingual, charming. Is he not, in many people's eyes, the natural successor to Joe Clark?
His name's been mentioned.
Is he not, in some people's eyes, the natural successor to Joe Clark?
His name's been mentioned.
Can't think of anybody else. I mean, Crombie wouldn't run for the leadership, would he?
He might. Who knows?
The tiny
Who
perfect.
Knows? Who knows?
What do you feel about an Easterner running the Tory party as the leader of the party? Is that ever possible nowadays? Apart from somebody from Quebec. I'm talking about, say, McMurtry from Ontario or Darcy, what's his name?
Darcy McHugh.
McHugh. Are these guys liable to be candidates for the leadership of the party at some time in the future?
Well, your famous Western columnist, Mr. Fotheringham, certainly seems to think so. He wrote a column where he said there were four. There were Crosby, Mulroney, McHugh, and McMurtry.
What do you have to do to win this presidential campaign? Are you mounting a campaign with the constituency associations all across the country now?
All across the country. I've been in some of the central cities. I'm now doing a tour through Western Canada, all the major population centers. I'll be meeting with the constituency delegates and obviously trying to persuade them that I will represent them, that I am not a slavish follower, that my voice will be heard in Ottawa.
Is Pat Nowlan running for the job too?
He is.
Is it an unpaid job?
It is.
That's Nowlan that used to be on the school board out here.
That I don't know. He's the MP from Nova Scotia.
Is Coates resigning or is
Coates
his job on the block?
No, Coates is not running again. He has publicly stated he's not running.
Well, now, tell me something which gives you hope that the Conservatives might win another federal election sometime after Trudeau says, finally, I don't give a damn, and walks away.
Well, I think eventually the people of Canada are going to accept the fact that we were on the right wavelength, that we were facing the issues, and that the kind of style we've accepted for the last 15 years has done a lot of damage. You can only live in that kind of darkness for so long before you wake up to the light, and we'll bring it next time.
Are you interested in what the public might think of a leadership review, or are you not concerned in that at all?
Well, obviously I'm interested in what the public might think, but it seems to me that's a decision which we should make as a Conservative Party. And one of the things I'm concerned about is that we were bullied essentially about Bob Stanfield. Bob Stanfield catches 30 footballs in a row, drops one, and that's the picture that goes in the paper.
Give me a line. Let's do a segment about the media and how much you hate them.
I don't hate them.
Well, they're a bunch of liberal flacks.
Some of them are. Some of them are NDP flacks.
After the break. Peter Blaikie is from, you're actually from Montreal, I suppose?
Yeah, I grew up in a small town, but I live in Montreal.
You live in Montreal. And he's after the job of national president of the Progressive Conservative National Association, or what's that effect. And that comes up when? When is the leadership review?
February 27th.
And when do you go on the blocks along with Nowlan and Coates?
Not Coates. Chris Spire. Third one's Chris Spire from Ontario.
Chris
Spire. MP
Spire.
from Ontario. March the 1st.
You haven't got a Westerner running for the presidency at all.
Not yet, at least.
There are lots of Tories in the West, mind you, haven't
Lots
you?
of them.
I'd like you to give me any cogent thoughts you have on how the media has treated Clark in comparison to the way they've treated Trudeau. Apart from the football for Stanfield.
Right. Well, I'm always surprised that you, as a group, and I don't mean you personally, are so intimidated by Mr. Trudeau. I find that quite fantastic because he is so easily attackable on so many issues, whereas on a lot of issues, I think Clark's been right. Sure, there have been some mistakes and they get blown up, but I don't so much blame the media as blame us. I'm not prepared to be bullied by the media, and I don't think we as a party should be prepared to be bullied by the media, and I don't think we should give you gentlemen the opportunity to do what you do. That's what disturbs me about disunity. So that when I say I'm going to support the leader of the party publicly, I may have some disagreements with him privately, but I'm not going to give the media the chance to do what it does.
Oh, you're dead right about the media, including yours truly to some extent, although I do my damn best, by being intimidated by the shrewd, erudite, Jesuitical debater. And in the course of an interview, you've got to keep turning around to him and saying, look, I'm asking the questions, Mr. Minister, not with you, whereas interviewing Joe is not that difficult, because Joe tends to give you answers to the best of his ability forthwith.
But why don't you ever say to
not
Mr.
looking for a
Trudeau,
way to
rubbish?
put you down.
But why don't you just say rubbish? Because he talks rubbish all the time.
Well, it's very difficult to say to a man if he's the Prime Minister because he diverts you, you, Mr. Prime Minister, are a liar.
Well, no, I don't think it's a question of saying he's a liar. I mean, for example, during the last election campaign, Patrick Watson interviewed him. And the very first statement was, as I recall it, the Tories are going to put an 18-cent excise tax on gasoline and heating fuel. Well, that was just a false statement. We weren't going to tax heating fuel at all. Patrick Watson didn't say a word.
Oh, you look at my record, it ain't too bad in interviewing Trudeau.
No, I'm not. That's why I said I think you're probably an exception.
No, maybe not always an exception, but I do my best. But is it not a fact that the media bends over backwards to support the Liberals because of their entrenchment? That the country is run by the Mandarins, no doubt about it. Desbarats will tell us that very shortly when I have him on about his book. And that your own packaging and PR stuff is somewhat pathetic. You don't program your people correctly.
I think it could be better. There's no doubt about it. But basically, I think as a party...
One guy who doesn't get messed around and comes across strong most of the time is Crosby.
No question. No question, because he will not be intimidated.
He's got a better image than Joe has with the media.
That may or may not be, but as far as I'm concerned, the image shouldn't be as important as everybody seems to make it. In other words, I'm not prepared to concede that Joe Clark has an image problem. I think a lot of Canadian voters have an image problem, because that's all they're looking at, and I don't think that's enough.
Joe Clark on his feet in the House of Commons from this distance, and we, of course, are isolated from the rest of the country, let's face it, comes across well in the House of Commons, not nearly so well outside of the House of Commons.
I've never really understood that, because in the House, when he actually debates Pierre Trudeau in the House, he wins every time.
Trudeau, on the other hand, comes across very nastily in the House, but comes across much better outside.
He's an actor.
Maybe the House of Commons doesn't matter anymore in the Canadian scheme of things.
Well, Pierre Trudeau has made it not matter to a large extent. It should matter. And I think Joe Clark wants it to matter, and I certainly want it to matter, but I agree, it doesn't matter as much as it has.
Are you a right wing or a red Tory?
I'm not prepared to be labeled in that way.
You're not prepared to be labeled in any way. You're a
Why
good...
should I be labeled?
Well, it's a matter of showbiz. Matter of interest, a matter of showing the progressive Tories, the red Tories in the West Coast, you're the man they should support instead of formally supporting this man Coates or Nowlan.
But if you ask me a specific question about an issue, I'll tell you where I stand on it, but I'm not prepared to be labeled. I hope I'm somewhat broader than that.
I'm trying to think of a federal issue.
Ah, maybe that's part of the problem.
Well, energy policy. Who can follow the constitutional debates with any real understanding and skill in it? Because both parties all the time misrepresent the facts.
Well, I think on the constitutional issue, the real issue is one of attitudes. That's what I'm so disturbed about.
Look at your man Fraser, who wants to impose bilingualism on Ontario. Wouldn't dare impose it in BC, would he?
I wasn't aware that he was trying to impose it on Ontario. I think it's a mistake even there. You can't impose that kind of thing.
That was certainly the effect of his questioning of Chrétien the other day.
Possibly. I've been out campaigning and I wasn't aware of that, but you can't impose it. Won't work.
Anyway, you're campaigning as a reform president for the National Tory Association.
Strong grassroots president, yes.
Lots of little people.
Lots of little people, medium-sized people, big people, the whole party.
See you at the convention.
Many thanks.
My thanks to Peter Blaikie. Next, we go to Tom Kent, Royal Commission of Newspapers, after the break. A cynic might well say that a royal commission opening today in Vancouver is a royal commission into why the stable door was open when the horses bolted. But I feel particularly at home with the chairman of this royal commission because it takes one to know one. And Tom Kent was one. Tom Kent, as the chairman of this royal commission looking into why the horses have bolted, how long since you were a newspaper man? A real honest-to-God, ink-stained wretch.
Sorry, I hate to say 20 years.
And where was that?
That was in Winnipeg.
And what were you doing in Winnipeg?
I was editing the Free Press, which in those days was a newspaper by itself, not part of any chain.
It was owned by Sifton.
Yeah, but by Victor Sifton, who didn't own any other newspapers at that time.
An honest-to-God, one ownership newspaper with total freedom.
Yes, I think it's fair to say total freedom.
Prior to that, though, did you not, Mr. Kent, however, Tom, if I may,
Yeah,
have a
please.
distinguished career in the United Kingdom?
Well, I don't know about the distinguished, but I had a career, yes. The Guardian and The Economist, yeah.
Oh, both of these, too, were independent newspapers.
Very independent, yes, and set up, of course, both of them under trust arrangements whereby people couldn't make money out of them. The proprietors just took a limited return on their profits, and everything else was ploughed back into the development of the paper, which of course has made The Economist in particular probably one of the most successful businesses that you know, the world has seen in the last 30 years.
Do I see a gleam in your eye? Far be it from me ever to think that I could have precognition to guess what right kind of recommendations you have. But in how many places in Canada do we have such a situation where a kind of good, honest trust allows freedom for that newspaper to operate within its economic limits?
Well, I think one should say that there have been, historically, many newspapers in Canada which really were operated in the spirit of, you know, a sense of public trust on the part of the proprietor. I think the Clifford Sifton, Victor Sifton generation in Winnipeg, that was true of them. I think it's been true of many other cases. I think it's still true of some individual proprietorships. But, you know, and you don't, whether or not it's formally involved in a trust deed is not in itself important. But certainly it is not the position in most of the Canadian newspaper industry today. Obviously it's not true of
oh, you're stolen my words. I was just about to say,
Sorry. Okay.
Here we alienated Westerners. Quote, take it for granted we are to some extent alienated, right? Here we alienated Westerners, and any major newspapers we have are all owned in the East.
Yeah, sure.
Is that bad?
Yeah, I think it is, sure.
Go back to August the 27th. Can you tell me, sir, as a former reporter, what happened on August the 27th, which caused people who are interested in the freedom of the press to throw up their morning flakes?
Well, I think the essence of what happened was that really there was created in people's minds the idea that, you know, it was even possible that every newspaper in Canada should be owned by one corporation, because suddenly, you know, there had been 3, now there were that recently had become only 2, and those 2, obviously, just suddenly happened that they were not competing anywhere, and that they dominated the scene, except in a limited number of cases, e.g. in the province of New Brunswick, which they didn't enter, and there everything was monopolized under somebody else. So there is a sense in people's minds that, you know, everything is controlled.
The trend
and that is a real problem.
Southam's...
What we can do about it's another matter, but it's a real problem.
But let's spell out the severity of it. FP and Thompson's and Southam's, right?
Yeah,
They're all there. All of a sudden, August 27th, the Winnipeg Trib goes down.
Yeah, FP has disappeared. It's only Thompson and Southam.
That's right.
And then of the Thompson papers in Winnipeg, the FP survives, but the Southern paper goes down. In Ottawa, the other way round. In Vancouver, you have the arrangement so that there's now only Southern. In Victoria, it's just happened that Thompson has consolidated what were 2 papers into one. In Montreal, what was a joint interest has disappeared, and it's only Southern. Okay.
Do you find, like me, though, that one of the healthiest things in newspapering, and I mean news gathering, is competition? Can you have honest, aggressive news gathering if you don't have competition?
Well, you have to have competition in news gathering, sure. Now, I think we've got to face a hard fact that in the print media, you know, the economic basis has shrunk a great deal, thanks, you know, Jack, to your success in television, so to speak.
Well, you are a charmer.
Well, and
Far be it from me to-
other people's too, but okay, television has taken a lot of the market. We're moving into a world, we've got to face it, where the Teledon type of system is going to take over a lot of the advertising base, which up to now has been exclusively the newspaper's advertising base. You know, I mean the classified ad, the sort of small print things, which in the past television, radio couldn't compete with, but Teledon is going to be able to, very conveniently. So that the, you know, you've got to face it, the economic base for the print newspaper in its traditional form is getting narrowed. Now, what we've got to do, you know, what this commission, if it's worth anything, has got to try to do, is not to, it's not to sort of solve the problems that all of us would like to solve, and particularly if we're a bit nostalgic about the past, we'd like to solve them in terms of the past, but that's not the answer. We've got to ensure the maximum freedom of information and opinion in the circumstances for the media as a whole.
How can you ensure
for newspapers?
How can you ensure freedom of opinion by interfering with government legislation? For instance, is not one of your terms of reference to look at the financial structure of newspapers?
Certainly.
Would you ever consider a state newspaper?
Well, I wouldn't say that I would never consider a state newspaper. Frankly, I would be very surprised if a state newspaper is really the answer to this problem. I would hope that what we can do is find ways, you know, it requires legislation, but not legislation in the sense of laying down the law as to what people do, but legislation to set up the framework within which there can be a maximum number of people able, you know, and freedom always requires a framework, a maximum number of people and institutions able to put forward their opinions, their views, their idea of information through all the multiplicity, all the variety of print, you know, not only daily, but also weekly and community newspapers. And
but anyone who's got $25 million to lose can start a daily newspaper.
Yeah, can start a daily newspaper. But surely what's happening now is that with a great variety of means of information, and, you know, this is what's happening through the modern, you know, through the optic fibers and all these new wonderful devices. What we've got to make sure is that for the future, those don't get monopolized in the way that the print shop has been monopolized. So
are you going to look into the...
But you get, those are treated as, so to speak, common carriers, and people can get access to them. Okay, sorry.
That's CRTC.
No,
that's that kind of thing. That's not your line of business.
That's not CRTC. CRTC, with all respect to it, is really in a rather limited field at the moment. What we've got to do
we're
is...
controlled to an extent. We in the radio and television have what some people might crudely call subsidiary monopolies to sell our wares and express our views. Newspapers are a different kettle of fish.
Yeah, of course, you have monopolies. It's becoming a little crazy, isn't it? Because the whole basis of it was originally the idea that there's a limited number of channels. Once you have a fiber optic network across this country, there's an unlimited number of channels. The whole basis for your monopoly and your regulation disappears.
Question. Are you going to look into the economic effect of the newspaper unions on the business?
Yes, we have to do that. You know, and I say that without meaning that I'm implying that the economic effect is bad.
It's deleterious.
It may be, may not, but certainly we have to look into it, sure. There are an awful lot of things we have to look into.
I don't know.
This is really a pretty unexplored territory, you know.
Is it worth the while? You had my snide remark at the beginning, locking the stable door after the... You cannot turn back the clock or turn back the page of yesterday's newspaper, now wrapped in fish and chips.
That's right, and that is absolutely true. And I must say, when I was first asked to get involved in this, which was just the day after those sad events you were talking about, my first reaction was, you know, how can it be worth doing? But when I came to think about it for 24 hours or so, it seemed to me that, you know, in fact, it is essential that we find a way, not to turn back the clock, you can't do that, but to find a way, you know, to make what was good in the old clock work in a new clock.
Just before I forget, though, you won't have had time to examine the Sun in the province, or what used to be the Sun in the province.
What do you mean, not enough time to examine?
Well, you don't read them on a daily basis like
No,
I
I don't read
do
them on
you?
a daily basis, no.
Without going on oath.
You know, the staff of the commission as a whole will take let's take a pretty hard look at them.
Without going on oath, may I tell you that since Vancouver Sun was once Vancouver's proud home-owned newspaper,
Yeah.
20-odd years ago,
I remember
standard-
it had a publisher who was an old-style publisher in a way, who left a good deal of editorial freedom and so on.
used
yeah.
to work for him.
Yeah.
And boy, how the papers have gone down the hill since then.
Yeah.
I suppose we must accept this as part of the modern day.
Well, I don't know. That style
Well-
has disappeared, yes. But, okay, surely the problem always is to recreate what was good in the old style in inevitably changed conditions.
When will you finish your hearing?
Damn difficult, but we'll try.
Got to keep this short. I edit as I go.
Okay.
When will you finish hearings?
We'll finish our hearings in Ottawa about the middle of March. We will deliver our report to the government by July the 1st.
Is that a promise?
It's not a promise, it's an absolutely firm commitment.
The day the Constitution comes back.
I don't care about that, but anyway, on July the 1st, we'll do it.
Final question. Is it true Tom Kent, who once ran again and was against him, was defeated by Tommy Douglas
and Barnaby Coquitlam, that's a long time ago now.
Is it true that you are the biggest hirer of newspaper men in the country at the moment? How many have you got in your staff?
Oh gosh, we've got quite a lot. We've got Tim Creary and Peter Deborah, et cetera,
And Walter
et cetera.
Stewart?
Well, no, the only people we've, they're just doing, most of them are just doing a particular job for us. Tim Creary, Peter Deborah, one or two are doing, a more or less full-time job. And we've got lots who are doing part-time jobs.
But you haven't been able
for
to...
a month or 2 months or whatever. Frankly, a lot of good people available.
750
That's the
thrown out of work
That's
on
the
that day?
fact of the newspaper industry at the moment. They're good people, and they're doing a good job for us.
I shall be present at your circus this afternoon.
Look forward to it.
Might not be a circus. Fotheringham is presenting a brief. That should be interesting. Next we have a short bulletin from Christine Hearn in Ottawa, and then I'm going to interview Peter Deborah on his book, Canada Lost, Canada Found, after the break. First, I'm going to talk to Christine Hearn, Ottawa Bureau, and she's going to give me a bulletin on something that's happened to Jean Chrétien. This very day or yesterday, Christine?
Apparently last night, Mr. Chrétien was taken to the National Defense Medical Center here in Ottawa, suffering from abdominal pains.
How long is he going to be in?
Maybe several days. He'll certainly be away from work for the rest of the week. They apparently say it's not serious. He's not in any danger, but he will be out of commission for a while.
Well, he's probably exhausted from all the work on unilateral patriation and all the rest of it.
That's right. He's been appearing before the committee for up to 10 and 12 hours a day all last week. He was scheduled to appear again at 8 o'clock tonight and for the remainder of this week, so it could well be exhaustion.
Do you know if the committee will continue to sit? They'll just switch the witnesses, I suppose.
Well, they may have a little trouble rescheduling anybody today, but I'm sure by tomorrow they'll have found somebody to fill in until Mr. Chrétien's back on his feet.
So Jean Chrétien, Minister of Justice, the architect of the Constitution at the moment, is in hospital, National Defense Hospital, with abdominal pains for observation for at least a few days.
Yeah.
Thank you, Christine.
Okay, thanks, Jack. Bye.
Right. And just on that very point to Peter Deborah, before I mention his book, are you surprised by the fact that the man's exhausted and not very well?
I seem to remember, Jack, that he had trouble with physical exhaustion when 10, 12 years ago when he was Minister of Northern Affairs. Since he's apparently all right, I suppose it's permissible to say that he's having some form of labor pains. Anybody that's trying to give birth to a new constitution, I think it's understandable.
Not a bad crack at all. Well, I read your book, Canada Lost, Canada Found, and there's one sentence that sticks right at the beginning of the book, which is a very sad commentary on the state of the nation, with which I tend to agree. The only passion that joins us from coast to coast is that of hatred. Is that your serious summary of the state of the nation, which you say is Canada found today?
I'm going to turn that back on you a bit, Jack, because one of my reasons for writing that was personal. I've been in the business of expressing myself in print and on television and radio for about 15 years now, and I've been called everything under the sun. I've been called anti-French, anti-English, anti-Trudeau, anti-Clark, anti-Catholic, anti-Protestant. I think that anybody in this position exposes themselves to what I say is the sort of lower strata of Canadian public opinion. And you realize very, very quickly that we're not a sort of dull, dispassionate, unemotional people at all. We're seething with emotions, and you must have felt that. I mean, you've been in contact with people, and you've been called everything under the sun.
Yeah, but
surely you don't think that we're an unemotional people.
No, my position is, though, that I find it hard to judge because everything is colored by my own particular brand of cynicism, which one must have after more than half a dozen years in dealing with politicians and government.
Well, I think you get cynical about politicians, but perhaps not about the process. What I was saying in the book, really, is that we did have an idea of what this country could become at the time of Confederation, and we didn't achieve it. We didn't measure up to the ideals of the Fathers of Confederation. And ever since then, we've been struck by a sense of our destiny really being out of our control. And we blamed one another for that. The French have blamed the English have blamed the French. And I say that this is the dominant characteristic of this country for the last 113 years, and we have hated one another. If there's one characteristic that unites us from coast to coast, it's hatred. And you can see in the constitutional process going on in Ottawa right now, the hatreds are all there, all there.
Are these hatreds on a regional basis, or are these hatreds on a political basis?
Oh, it's, you know, it used to be religious. Catholics used to hate Protestants. Everybody hated the Jews, and they hated everybody else. I mean, it was, the religious aspect has gone down a little bit. It's language, I suppose, is the main thing. We're always afraid that one language group is going to get a big advantage over the other, and now it's money. We're jealous of the new prosperity out here in the rest of the country. It's regional political influence, which, you know, this is the kind of atmosphere that we have in Ottawa right now.
You talk about hatred, but at the same time you say that we're not capable of moral outrage, that we're apathetic when it comes to moral outrage.
I think that's true. I think it's undeniable that, well, in the United States, there was a second-rate burglary of a party headquarters, and as a result, a president was thrown out of office. In this country, we've had documented burglaries by the federal police force of the offices of a legitimate, recognized political party in Quebec, and nobody gets very excited about it. It wasn't even an issue in the last election campaign. We accept that kind of thing passively because we have a feeling that we have, for the last 113 years, lost control of our own political destiny. We want people to run our affairs for us, to manage things for us.
Now, this may be a view from the West, but all of a sudden, apart from the language capered over Ontario and bilingualism and Hatfield's silly remarks, I would think, in London, the Quebec situation has disappeared from view in the West. Is that sheer blindness of people like myself in the West? No,
I think things move in cycles, and I think separatism has waned in Quebec as it's risen in Alberta and perhaps to some extent in British Columbia. In Ottawa, we hear more about separatism in Alberta than we do in BC, but it will come again. That's one of the things that I'm frightened of. The next cycle, there will be another cycle of nationalism in Quebec because it recurs over and over again, and the next cycle will start not with a few eccentrics as this one did in 58, 59. It'll start with that 40% vote that we saw in the referendum, and it's going to be fearsome.
What do you mean by fearsome?
Well, it'll be conclusive. I think if nothing is done about patriation, if nothing is done about giving this country a more efficient federal system, the next cycle of separatism in Quebec will be conclusive. I don't have any doubt at all about that.
If nothing is done about patriation, well, that's going to be done come hell or high water unless the British don't
I guess
play
it
ball.
is. Do you think the process, I've been trying to figure out in my own mind whether the process has now reached the point of no return, you know, whether we've gone so far down the road that we can't turn back.
I cannot in any way, shape or form see a British House of Commons refuse, or the Queen refuse the advice of our First Minister in Canada.
I agree with you. I think what's going on in England right now is absolutely incomprehensible.
Even if it's bad advice from their point of view, I don't see how they can possibly refuse to patriate whatever the Senate and the House put to them in a message from Ottawa.
I was on an open line show in Ottawa the other day, and we had a new Canadian of British origin on the line. And he said, don't pay any attention to the British MPs who are making a lot of noise. They're nothing but paid servants of the multinational oil companies who are doing Alberta's work in London.
I don't see that. I can just see the usual awkward squad who will cause trouble, especially in the Labour Party and some in the Conservative Party, to show that after all they're still the mother country.
Don't you find it humiliating what's going on in London right now?
Well, I find
I'm
it
absolutely, you know, the fact that after all these years, when we've considered ourselves to be an independent country, suddenly before the eyes of the world, the fate of our Constitution and the structure of Canada is a subject of political debate in London, I find almost unbelievable. I think that's another reason why this time we have to do it. I mean, for God's sake, we can't go through another charade like this again. It has to be done this time.
Is it not also, however, just a little humiliating that we, the Canadians, have to go to London to pass legislation, a constitution, which apparently our federal government cannot pass in this country?
Well, it may be able to.
Bending the knee to the colonial power, if you want to extrapolate that far.
It has to be done in London. I mean, it's our fault that it's still in London. It's not the fault of the British. But, you know, we may be able, in fact, if we can do something in Parliament, surely that is doing something on a national scale. I mean, just because everybody in the country can't agree, just because all the provincial premiers can't agree, doesn't mean that we can't make a national decision. I would think a parliamentary decision is a national decision, particularly if we can have both the major parties involved in it, and that is now in sight. What Joe Clark said the other day brings that within sight.
What was that?
He said in Halifax that the Tories wanted to split things. They would support patriation with an amending formula, but no Charter of Rights. Well, I would think that if that's all we can get, and we can get it with both the major parties behind it, that's a hell of a lot more than we've been able to get before.
Do you think he meant a patriation with Trudeau's amending formula?
I think
they all
they'll be
said,
able to.
I mean, Trudeau really slipped one over on me the last time I interviewed him when he says, well, we're all agreed we want the Constitution back. There's no argument about it. Well, of course there's an argument about the way it comes back, the form of the amending formula. But perhaps we should bring it back with his amending formula and with the Bill of Rights and then change the Constitution if we have to.
I would like to see patriation with an amending formula and a Charter of Rights. As a Quebecer, I'm very keen, naturally, on having some sort of language rights in the Charter. But if we can't get the Charter of Rights at this time, if that has to wait, I would accept patriation with an amending formula. We've never been able to get that far before. And it's true that we can then deal with the Charter of Rights back home in Canada. It's not an ideal solution, but I suspect that Trudeau may have the Charter of Rights in there as a bargaining lever, and he may drop that finally.
How many of you out there have hatred as a passion? And I'm not asking you to tell me. How many of you are not outraged by things like the RCMP scandals? I think you probably all are on a one-to-one basis. More with Peter Desbarats. He's going to tell us how Canada can be found in detail after the break. You can read Peter Desbarats' book for yourself. First of all, you were at Global.
I was with Global. Yes, I was with Global up until last August when
you
I
were
was
CBC.
fired. I was fired.
Well, you're fired.
I don't make any bones about that. No, they decided. They said that political commentary was boring. We'd all be out of business.
Yeah, I know the people who are running Global.
No, they had budget cutbacks. They're selling their soccer team now, but before they put the soccer team on the block, they got rid of me.
You were CBC for a long time too.
Yes, I hosted a daily public affairs and news show in Montreal for 5 seasons, and I've gone back and forth from print and television for about 15 years now.
How does it feel not to have a daily?
Star.
How does it feel not to have a daily deadline?
It feels lovely. Yes, I'm enjoying it.
Would you recommend it for me?
I would.
Mind
not for your viewers, I think, but for you.
I'm much younger than you are, so therefore I have a little bit more time to play with.
Yes.
But you got on to some of my pet hobby horses in your book. I hate to agree with an author. One of them was...
I hate to agree with the Prime Minister, as I do in this book, in a sense. That's one of the things that I...
Because you and the Prime Minister have had some celebrated Barneys.
Oh, yes, we have. You know,
face-to-face on television.
Face-to-face on television, yeah. When I asked him about his marriage a couple of years back, he asked me about mine, and I lost that round.
I never had guts enough to ask him about his marriage.
Well, we had a discussion. I was doing the interview with Peter Truman in Toronto. We had a discussion beforehand. Bill Cunningham was the news director, was in on it, and we decided that it was a legitimate question. It was a political, Margaret was a political factor. Who was going to ask the question? So I said, well, I'll do the dirty work. I don't enjoy doing this, but there's a legitimate reason for asking about this.
There was
I
at the
said,
time.
I said, you know, how's your marriage going? Is there and he said, how's yours? And I said, is there any hope of reconciliation? And he said, what about yours?
He's a great one for turning the questions around, isn't he?
Yeah.
Just to digress for a moment.
I fought him on the War Measures Act also, and in Dick Wynn's book about Trudeau, he said that Trudeau was only persuaded with great difficulty to give me an interview in the last election campaign. The Liberal Party specifically requested, and I know this through my contacts at Global, that I should not take part in a leader's debate on television if there had been one the last time around. So my credentials as a Trudeau critic are substantial enough for me to, in this case, in fact, find myself in the same camp
and to
as
say
far
out,
as patriation
and
goes.
to say bluntly out loud that patriation is essential, must be given by the British without any problem, because if we don't have patriation, then some entrenchment of language rights a few years down the road, we're going to see a reaction in Quebec that will be hard
not
to
just in
believe.
Quebec. I think that patriation is necessary for the whole country. I think it's necessary for the West as well. I think that patriation would be a sign that we are capable of reaching at least this kind of political decision somehow as a nation, and that we can go on to greater things after that. Look what's happening now, Jack, with energy, and I think it's typical. We live in a country that is the only country in the Western world that could become self-sufficient in energy, and our great natural richness is destroying us. You know, we're pulling ourselves apart because we can't agree on how the energy is to be divided. It's you know, so there's got to be some kind of turnaround in this situation, and I see the patriation of the Constitution as a kind of turning point.
Well, in the final analysis, you were a man who opposed the War Measures Act. It took me some time to waken up to that, to which I
opposed it in English-speaking Montreal, and believe me, that was tough in 1970.
But is it not a fact that it's going to be similarly long before... Oh, I was going to ask you. He used the War Measures Act. If the crunch came to the crunch in Alberta, on pricing or supplies, even though Lougheed says he will not let Canadians suffer as he begins to cut back. Would Trudeau use the Section 91 of the BNA Act before he gets the Constitution back to enforce his will on the West?
In terms of supply of energy, I don't think, I'm not a constitutional expert in that sense, but I don't think that, the Supreme Court or any supreme legislative body in this country would permit one part of the country to suffer materially in a drastic fashion because of the action of a provincial government. I'm sure that there is overriding national interest that any federal government could call on at any time. And that's why Lougheed very carefully says 15%, but none of those bastards will freeze in the dark, in effect. Because if he stepped over that line, the authority of the federal government would be quite clear.
Now let's look at the Canada lost for the moment.
But Lougheed isn't Alberta, just the same as Bennett is not necessarily BC, as you know.
Provincial
and there's a certain
governments...
strong national feeling in the West as well.
Well, you take the likes
provincial governments are fighting for their own power. Provincial bureaucracies are fighting for their own power. They don't necessarily speak for the people in the province all the time.
Couldn't agree with you more, unfortunately. But give me your shot on the 2,300,000 Canadians who work for governments. I think I've got your figures right. We must have more civil servants per head of population than almost anywhere in the world.
I think that's true. Everybody who's measured this by statistics says that we're one of the most over-governed countries in the Western world. And I think it comes out of this political failure, that we failed to achieve the original aims of Confederation. We lost a sense of being able to control ourselves politically. We wanted other people to manage things for us, and so we produced bureaucrats. We produced bureaucrats in the business world. People have been saying for years that our businessmen are not creative entrepreneurs. They have a kind of bureaucratic mentality.
And who are the two men you name in your book? Don't bother with MPs, don't bother with senators. Go to two, the power of two individuals is greater than anybody else in the country, almost, you say.
I guess that was Jim Coots and Michael Pitfield, you know.
Well, how has this come about?
In the United States, when they've done surveys, they say, where do you go in Washington if you want to influence people? 2/3 of the people say we go to the politicians, 1/3 say we go to the bureaucrats. In Canada, when they do that survey, it's exactly the opposite. 2/3 say go to the bureaucrats, and only 1/3 say go to the politicians. The politicians themselves have testified to this. Robert Stanfield has been telling us in recent years that what goes on in the House of Commons is not important anymore. It's what goes on in the bureaucracy. Of course, the only thing you see on the news is what goes on in the playpen in the House of Commons, because that's easy to cover.
Therefore, it really isn't much hope for an active democracy when the mandarins can take over any politician and run them the way they want.
That's what Flora said after her little stint in external affairs.
External
she wrote
affairs.
a very good paper saying that she was, or that the bureaucracy tried to run her, and she showed exactly how it happened. However, again, you know, I think that almost as an article of faith, that if we can bring back the Constitution, if we can achieve this kind of political victory, because this is something that the bureaucrats in Ottawa aren't all that interested in. Most of the bureaucrats I talk to think that Trudeau is crazy to try and patriate. They don't like that kind of radical solution. If we can achieve that, I think that's the beginning of regaining control over our political destiny somehow.
Going to take calls to Peter Desbarats this morning on Canada Lost and Canada Found and bring back the Constitution and UDIs. What did you think of Hatfield? Was that a kite flown on behalf of Trudeau by Blaikie?
No, I don't think so. That's the kind of thing that Hatfield does from time to time. You know, he does. He's a passionate premier in some ways, and he feels strongly about it.
Peter Desbarats after the break. You didn't see the Constitution Committee on television last week?
No, I didn't watch those sessions, no.
Where Robinson and Fraser, Sven Robinson and John Fraser, the Tory.
I think Fraser got caught out a little bit.
Yeah, but they were still hammering Chrétien on it. Now, with 600,000 Franco-Canadians in Ontario, should Chrétien have had the moral toughness to put that in his package? Official bilingualism for Ontario.
Well, I would say yes, of course. You know, I think we should have. I speak out of my own Quebec background, Anglo-Quebec background.
Well, you brought up Anglo. You brought up Anglo.
Anglo-Quebec, yes, but I feel that there should be official bilingualism to
the
maximum extent right across the country.
So Trudeau and Chrétien therefore chickened out, so as not to alienate Davis's support in Ontario.
I think that's true, and perhaps they were also frightened, as Davis is, of a backlash in Ontario. There's still a lot of redneck feeling in Ontario. You know, I have a country place 30 miles north of Kingston in Tom Cossett's county. And, wow.
On the other hand, how much do the provincial politicians actually represent the feelings of ordinary people? Because it would seem to me that the demand for French immersion for youngsters in this province is almost out of sight.
In BC, and the same curious thing you find in Ottawa. I live in a district in Ottawa which has a lot of civil servants. The civil servants who've been complaining about bilingualism for the past 15 years, and yet the English language school system is threatened in my district in Ottawa because of the number of English-speaking civil servants who want their kids educated in French.
Well, obviously, if we stay together as a nation, it's absolutely essential for anyone who wants to rise in the councils of this nation to be bilingual.
It is now, and increasingly so. Increasingly.
Just a word before I go to the phones on the Tory party. After that highly unsatisfactory interview with, well, it's all right, Peter Blaikie. Who do you think? Do you think they'll dump Clark? Or do you think enough of them will vote against him to make him go away?
I keep hearing reports right now that percentage is going to be very high. People are talking about 30, 40%. But I also feel that when it comes right down to the crunch at that convention, that the specter of putting the party into disunity at this particular time and giving the Liberals a nice 2 or 3 year period to arrange their own succession is going to discipline people. I feel when it comes right down to the crunch, they're going to draw back from that. I think that the vote will not be large enough to seriously undermine Clark. Why? I can't understand. The man who is responsible for what really has to rank as the most monumental political blunder in Canadian political history, the only prime minister who literally threw himself out of office. And the more you know about that, the more you understand his own responsibility. How he can survive that is a mystery to me.
Surely it was merely a question of not being prepared, being overconfident, and forgetting to make a deal with the creditists.
They stopped their polling. They stopped their polling, so that when they were faced with that vote in the House, the Liberals polled massively after they lost the election, and they knew what the state of public opinion was. The Tories were guessing at it. I mean, that was one of their basic faults, and the other basic fault was, you know, there were 900 different ways they could have got out of facing that test in the House at that particular time. And
one last question before I go.
It was Clark's decision. I mean, Clark, there's
he made it.
Yeah, he made it. Yes.
When you look at the coverage of Trudeau's somewhat disastrous north-south trip, talking to all these wealthy nations with oil and whatnot, he got reasonably sympathetic treatment from the press, whereas poor old Joe lost his underwear and was crucified. Why is that?
You were talking about that with Peter Blaikie. You know, Trudeau's an awesome man. He really is. I think he has been a great prime minister. I agree with Dick Wynn's assessment. He will be ranked as a great prime minister. In person, as you know, I think he is the only politician that I find quite terrifying to interview.
Me too.
I mean, he can, you know, the intellectual power is there. If you get into an argument with him, he'll cut you to ribbons before you know what's happened.
And we're also stuck with the business of moving along from place to place.
Still, the image is starting to crumble a little bit. You know, it wasn't just what the Canadian press said during this trip. It was what the foreign press said. It was that editorial in the Brazilian paper that said, "We've listened to this man talking about a better deal for underdeveloped nations for 15 years, and what has happened? Nothing." They're beginning to say internationally that the emperor has no clothes, and that's serious.
Will he walk away at the end of this time if the Constitution is back?
Yes, I think he'd like to get out. I really think, before Alan McKechnie got him back in again, that he was starting to welcome retirement. I think he'll be out in a couple of years.
Gosh, he's almost as old as I am. It's time he was retired. We have a call here. Go ahead to Peter Desbarats.
Good day, Peter.
Yes, yes.
Good morning. Good morning. I'm fine.
Go ahead, please.
Good day, Peter. How are you?
I'm fine. How are you?
Very good. I haven't seen you for a long time. Good day, Jack.
Well, can we...
Haven't seen me for a long time.
Can we skip the niceties and get down to the point?
Well, this is an Anglophone section, not a Francophone section, I believe, right?
Yep.
All right. Peter, let me ask you a question about this Constitution there you got to draw up there. What kind of an ideas you'd like to share with us out here in the West that have come from the East and decided to come out here to the West Coast for a little bit of freedom?
He's been telling you for 5 minutes he supports the return of the Constitution. He would support the amending formula. He also supports the Bill of Rights, and you have not been listening. Go to the bottom of the class.
Hello?
Go ahead, please.
Hello?
That's you, sir.
Yes, I'd like to ask Mr. Desbarats. I spend a lot of time myself in Ontario and Quebec, and Mr. Desbarats is caught in the same old trap. You people just don't realize how far in debt this country is because of Trudeau and their past regime since he's been in. Now, the national deficit is staggering, and you never seem to get around to mentioning that. And how can a country like Canada, as you mentioned, with all our resources, be so far in the hole? You know, we're in the hole to the tune of $100 billion, and this is in $74, $75, which is a lot higher now, the way the dollar is now. You people in the East, for some reason, can't. You always overlook that.
Oh, this is a big topic in the East. I mean, I read a great deal written by Eastern commentators about government overspending, and in fact, the government has been trying to cut back. But I also read that our national debt, compared with other countries, and even compared with the debt that we had, say, 20 or 30 years ago, in proportion to the income that we now have, is not excessive.
The fact is, no matter how long it goes on, that is not a war debt. You can't write it off. And untold generations of Canadians are going to have to pay that off. And I'm a conservative from the West, and in particular Alberta and British Columbia, and I don't think you realize it down East, but we're just not prepared to live with it.
Well, I don't know, this argument doesn't really break down into a Central Canadian, Western Canadian argument. I mean, I hear people saying exactly the same thing in Ontario, and in fact, you should realize that it's your point of view that is on the winning side right now. The people who want to cut back on government spending, the people who want to cut back on government regulation, the people who want to slice social welfare programs down to the bone are the people who are winning this public debate right now. So you're not in a minority, sir. You're in a majority right now.
Well,
I'm in the minority.
From you, especially down East, but whether you realize it or not, we cannot go on the way it's going on, and we're going to have to trim the fat somehow.
Thank you, sir. I think everybody except the NDP had agreed on that.
Pretty well, yeah. That's the trend right now.
Poor old NDP, they're kind of two-headed and schizophrenic at the moment, are they not?
Well, it's not a congenial time for them in some respects, but I mean, they've become so conservative that they're running with the current themselves. I mean, really, it's not a socialistic party anymore.
Webster and Peter Desbarats, keep your questions short and sharp after the break. Try a call from Victoria to Peter Desbarats. Go ahead, please.
Good morning, Peter.
Morning.
I don't know how well conversed you are in British Columbia feeling of the native people, but to me, and I would like your comments on this, a lot of them think that the whole world ends at hope, and I think even your friend Webster is a bit guilty of this when he talks about the Mideast and the Far East, you know. How do you feel about, or have you had enough time to expose yourself to this kind of thing? But I really have the feeling that hope, you know, if Columbus came over, that's where he'd drop off.
You're being cynical about it. You're talking about the native people aspirations or our myopia I hear from...
Talking about British Columbians generally, Jack, not the native people, no.
Well, my feeling basically about regional alienation or the political divisions in the country is that it is time to try and reform federal structures somehow so that there's a much stronger voice, particularly from the West, in Ottawa. In the 60s, what I stood for was a stronger voice for Quebecers in Ottawa, and now I think it's time for a stronger voice for Western Canadians. You know, it's not time to have more power in Victoria or Edmonton. It's time to have more Western power in Ottawa, and there are lots of suggestions about how to do that.
Yeah,
right
but
now.
Trudeau's biggest weakness right now is a very simple fact of political life, that he's got no MPs in the West.
That's a big political weakness, and his personal weakness is that he has never, obviously, I mean, this is a truism, he's never understood Western Canada. He has no emotional empathy with Western Canadians at all, and he's never going to overcome that. You have to accept that as a disability.
I mean, I don't feel that separatism is an alternative here at all at this moment. I don't think there's much in British Columbia. I can't judge Alberta, you know. But even the plans to reform the Senate are apparently down the tube, aren't they?
At the moment, yes, at the moment. But if we can make that basic political decision to bring home the Constitution, perhaps we can do something about the Senate eventually.
Well, isn't it disgusting to think that Chrétien, God wish him
The other
well,
thing, yeah, go ahead.
I'm talking about the advertising campaign all over again. Remember the seagulls going from east to west instead of north to south?
I don't like that, no.
I think that's pap.
Maybe now that I have the book out, they can forget about it.
Maybe they should. Thanks very much. Go ahead, please.
Good morning. The previous caller took part of my question, unfortunately. I was wondering why Mr. Desbarats thought that repatriating the Constitution would have some effect on the alienation of the West. And by the way, Jack, in Alberta, there's considerable separatist sentiment. I'm from there.
I think, as I said, it's a chance to go back to the original aims of Confederation, the creation of a free, equal, and democratic society in this country. It's a chance to go back. That's what we're talking about in Ottawa right now when all the divisions seem apparent. It's a remolding of the country. It's a chance to bring Canadians together in a basic and elementary political decision to have what every other developed country has, its own constitution. I feel that if we can show a sufficient amount of trust in one another between regions to get together on this, perhaps we can then start to make some other steps based on trust instead of, as I said at the beginning of our conversation, national hatred.
If he can't make a deal, if Trudeau can't make a deal with Lougheed, what difference is the Constitution going to make?
I think that the Constitution is a very important symbolic thing, Jack, a very important psychological thing. I think it's up there with the flag, which was important for us, the anthem. I think that the Constitution is even more important. I think that there will be a kind of rush of feeling, of patriotism, I suppose, on July 1st or whenever it is, when that Constitution finally comes home, that is going to enable us to take even larger steps. But I do think that it's time for these decisions to be taken by Ottawa. And I expect the provincial governments to squawk. But I don't, as we said before, I don't know whether the provincial governments necessarily speak for all their constituents.
One of the big dangers in this country in the past 10 years since Victoria is the fact that provincial governments and first ministers go to Ottawa in that big railway committee room and negotiate about matters for which they are not responsible to their own electorate.
The federal government is the only one that answers to voters right across the country. The other thing is that most of the negotiations, of course, are done not in the committee room in front of the television cameras, but they're done around the dinner table in the Prime Minister's residence, and we only learn about the decisions.
It's all a PR display in many ways. Go ahead, please.
Hello, Peter.
Yes.
It seems obvious to me that Canadians, as Canadians, be they in Ontario, Quebec, or wherever, would find it not too difficult to agree with Canadians from other parts of the country over energy or anything else. As politicians, I very much doubt, and I suppose everybody else doubts, if they ever see Trudeau and Lougheed come close enough together to get a viable package on energy going. Do you think there's any possibility of an alternative in more or less citizens in a non-political method getting together and settling these differences?
Politicians are always going to have differences, and they're fighting for their own interests, you know, and I think that's legitimate. I wrote this book because I realized about a year ago that I did feel, in fact, very strongly about patriation. I said to Jack McClelland, the publisher, this is one time where I want to express not a survey of the opinions of others, which is what I'd been doing for most of my career, but my own opinion. Somehow, to me, patriation has appeared to be a symbol of great emotional power, as I said a moment ago, like the adoption of the flag. And I think that it is something, particularly if the two major parties in Ottawa can finally get together on it, it is something that will unite Canadians and that Canadians will regard as a kind of significant national achievement. And maybe some of the barriers of hatred and hostility that now divide us will drop somewhat as a result of our satisfaction with ourselves, at least that we've been able to achieve that.
Wouldn't a new Prime Minister help after it's back?
After it's back, yes, because this is the only Prime Minister who conceivably will bring it back. I don't think
it's tough enough to bring it back. My thanks to Peter Desbarats, author of Canada Lost and Found, and one of the more acceptable members.
Can I say, there's just one small loose end.
Yes, please.
We talked about the interview with Trudeau a few years ago where he asked me how my marriage was. This has just bothered me a little bit because I wish you'd asked me the question today. It's terrific.
Now, why in the name of goodness would I be interested in positive news about your marital bliss?
I don't know. It just was a kind of loose end at the conversation.
Peter Desbarats, happily married author of Canada Lost and Found.
And an optimist. Maybe it has something to do with
it. If just they'd leave that Bill of Rights and just bring over the language entrenchment.
I think we're just going to get the Constitution and the amending formula, and we'll have to tangle with the language problem back in Ottawa after that.
After the break. It doesn't look as if the hostages will fly out of Iran during the night, and there's some other discussion, perhaps trivial, about financial. Now, I've been hanging on to a letter here for a couple of days, and I want to use it because it's a most unusual letter, and it comes to me from Longhai County in a province of China, and it's addressed to radio and television in Canada. And I just want to show this letter in case we can do something for the person who has written a letter to radio and television in Canada from China. And it says, "First of all, I wish you the best of luck and the best of health. I am writing to you in hopes that you can help me reach a friend of mine. In '59, we were classmates while studying Chinese in China. We studied at the 22nd Middle School in Canton. I have not seen her in 21 years and have lost her address. But I know she lives in Canada and would be about 38 years old now. Her name is Yuk Yun Tsi. I hope you can help me find her. I'm sure if she hears this on the air, she will get in touch with me. Yours sincerely, Chan Chow Tek, Longhai County, Fujian Province, China." So if Yuk Yun Tsi, who was in China 21 years ago, wants to get in touch with Chan Chow Tek, give us a telephone call. I think I'll carry on with some letters for a couple of minutes. And here's really a memo to the producer of the program, which I take no responsibility whatsoever. And the letter says, "A word to your producer. The Canadian Federation of University Women have been trying for years to get these ugly ads for feminine hygiene products off the air. Why isn't your female producer helping us in this regard? She is in a position of influence, but still these offensive ads appear in your show. Talk about women's rights. Between you, neither of you seems to give a care, and I think you should. So please, M. MacDonald." Next letter is from Penticton, and I don't know whether I should use it or not. Well, it's programmed. I got to use it now. And it says, "Thank you, Jack, for your excellent program. I think we are very fortunate in having the issues of the day being so clearly presented to us by you and your guests. I think you do a great service to our province, and I hope that the East never prevails upon you to transfer your allegiance. I find very little of interest on the rival station, as for several years their programs appear to be over-controlled by bureaucrats and have become insipid." Oh, this is too praiseworthy. It shouldn't have been on air. Keep up the good work, Jack, and continue to report it to us as it is from Penticton. Here's one that'll going to come back to haunt social credit. "I want to appeal to you to make known my family's outrage," but wrongly spelled, "over the new ICBC hikes. First of all, when the NDP brought the scheme in, it was to make the rates cheaper. Now there is no competition and we are paying incredible rises. I've never had an accident. 15 years of driving. Where is the fare break for people like me? Is there nothing we can do?" A. Kaufman, Maple Ridge. No, there's not very much you can do. Oh, really? I must be quite practical. Now, I think that'll do for letters this morning. How much time have I got to go on this break? Another letter. Can they do that? "I didn't pick these letters. At 9 a.m. precisely, Monday to Friday, all activity grinds to a halt in our apartment. The Webster show is coming on. In the past, you've had many Labour leaders on your programme, but there is one question that does not seem to be asked. They are all striving for more money for their members, but I have yet to hear one of them say they have increased their productivity. Next time you have a Labour leader on your programme, will you please ask them about this?" One more, from Osoyus, otherwise known as Osoyus, and it says, "In my opinion, the people who preach separatism from Canada are being very unpatriotic. It's not what Canada can do for me, but what I can do for Canada." Where have I heard that before? "We have too many selfish politicians and not enough of the real good statesmen. Believe me, I will vote for the party who works for Canada, and not for the party who wants to break up Canada. As far as I'm concerned, the people who preach separatism are a bunch of unpatriotic crybabies. Let us put our shoulder to the wheel and work for a united Canada. United we stand." J. Stevenson, Osoyus. Bad news about Chrétien this morning. You know, no matter what you think, the guy has been under such an incredible strain that it's not surprised that instead of being at the committee hearings today on the Constitution, he's in the National Defence Hospital in Ottawa, I think it is, a military hospital, for observation for abdominal pains. Very tough indeed. One must have sympathy for those who do those kind of things, whichever party they're in, for whomsoever they act in the national scene. And I'll be back after the break. If the Iranians decide to fly the hostages out tomorrow, out today, the earliest they could do our time would be 9 p.m. Vancouver time tonight. The airport is blacked out. There is a minor financial hitch in that somebody forgot to set up a receiving account in a London bank. Let's hope they get out today. Tomorrow, Gladys.
Federal Minister of Housing, Paul Cosgrove, and May Brown.
Good. Oh, Pierre BC.
Yes,
Is
more.
that still rattling around?
Still.
We've got to look at it. Tomorrow at 9 a.m. precisely.